everyone, it's Andrea, and welcome to this edition of Talks in the Car. Today, as I talk to you, I'm really talking to myself, and I want to encourage you and to instill in you, again, as I encourage myself and instill in myself, to let God be God. God is all-knowing. God is all-powerful. God has control of everything. God sees the beginning from the end. But sometimes what happens is that when we've been praying about something, when we have been desiring something, when we have been looking for God to do some things in our lives, we get impatient, we get anxious, we let stress get to us. And so instead of allowing God to do what God does best, and instead of allowing God to work situations out in our favor, we jump in the pool and we get involved in those things ourselves. We try to make things work. We try to make those doors open. We try to push things through. And when we do that, we disrupt what God has in mind. And I'm finding myself in that situation due to my insecurities, due to maybe being impatient, due to just some things that I want to see for myself. I found myself in a situation of pushing and nudging along and dropping signs and doing all of these things in an effort to get to a particular place, knowing though that at the end of the day, God has the final say. I have prayed, I have asked, I have sought, I have laid things at the feet of the Lord. But in my insecurity, in my fear, in my desire to see certain things take place, I have found myself going back to the altar and picking up those things and not allowing God to be God. And so as I encourage you to let God be God, I'm encouraging myself, because when we get our hands into the pot, when we get our hands on certain things, when we decide that we can do a better job at steering the ship, we find ourselves in situations where we don't understand the full concept of what's happened, and thus find ourselves in difficulties, thus find ourselves in situations that we didn't anticipate. There may be things that we are pushing that God is allowing, but we've taken that cake out of the oven too soon, and thus while it may be nice and brown on the top, inside it's doughy, it's not complete. And so I want to encourage you, let God be God. Allow God to steer the ship. Allow God to fly the plane. Allow God to be the chef. Allow God to do what God does, because you know what? We cannot be God. We don't know what God knows. We cannot operate as God operates. We cannot make things materialize. We cannot give favor the same way that God can. And when we get involved in things, we have a tendency to mess it up. We have a tendency to slow things down. We have a tendency to make things not what God would desire them to be. And so again, as I speak to myself and as I remind myself, God has every capability to do whatever it is that we are asking Him to do. But we have to get our hands off of it and allow God to be God. Allow God to do what He does best. Allow God to do and to operate in the way that He sees best for what the purpose is for our lives. Let God be God, friends. Let God be God, Andrea. Allow God to do and to say and to be the God that we say that we rely on. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week, and we will see you next time on Talks in the Car.